Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/malicious compliance, where people follow orders to the T to spite somebody. And in this episode, it's all about bad teachers getting taught lessons they won't forget. We've got teachers getting fired, getting embarrassed, and OP tells a story about the time a petty Karen teacher tried to get her expelled, and it backfires so hard. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this didn't happen to me, but it happened to my dad. And it's one of my favorite stories he tells. Some years ago, by which I mean 2 or so decades roughly, my dad was at a several-day course to earn some additional qualifications for his job. On the final day, there was going to be a multiple choice test to actually pass the seminar. On test day, everyone got settled into place, and the teacher announced that he would not go easy on cheaters. You had one strike to be caught trying to copy off someone else or use a cheat sheet. But if you were caught a second time, you would be immediately thrown out and your score made invalid. Now, this teacher was very old school strict, and he was treating grown working people like unruly school children, and my dad does not like that very much. So my dad proceeds to take the test, and it actually goes pretty well. When he's through with the questions, there's just one left where he's not sure he got it right, and he has one free strike after all. So my dad just yells out into the class. He calls out, "What's the answer to question 14? That's when some complete bro elsewhere in the room yells the answer back. My dad fills in the sheet, gets up, walks to the teacher's desk, trying not to trip on the teacher's jaw as it lies on the floor, and then hands in his test and leaves the room. To the teacher's credit, he actually approached my dad afterwards with some begrudging respect. I don't know if he changed his policy afterwards or the tone in which he conveyed it. Guys, I love this malicious compliance so much. I just hope the guy who yelled the answer out gave dad the right answer. It's such a weird rule to have on an exam, right? Like, I've never heard of a teacher giving out free passes on cheating. It was always zero tolerance, right? But nonetheless, OP's dad complied and used that free strike perfectly. And who knows, maybe it was one of those courses where everyone basically passes the course. Maybe that's why that rule was implemented. Alright, so back in middle school, we had this teacher who I'll call Mr. Teacher, who was kind of a jerk. That guy was kind of an odd guy who came off as very condescending to students. He also seemed kind of disinterested in teaching in general. One day, during math class, he's butchering a lesson on the basics of algebra. Literally, it's an introduction to show how an equation is formed and balanced. One kid is really struggling and he's asking a lot of questions, and Mr. Teacher is struggling to come up with a coherent explanation. That's when the class clown, who I'll call Kid, who was actually pretty smart, couldn't handle it anymore. And he interjects and says, "Mr. Teacher, you're explaining this in a really confusing way. It's not as complicated as you're making it out to be." That's when Mr. Teacher says to him, "Look, do you want to teach the class? Last time I checked, I'm the teacher." That's when the kid says, "Sure, I bet I can explain it better than you are right now." Teacher then says, "I'd like to see that. Go right ahead." Now, the tone of this wasn't friendly. Mr. Teacher was trying to put the kid in his place to embarrass him in front of the class, and he was really sarcastic about the whole thing. You could tell he thought the kid was gonna bomb and be embarrassed. Well, the kid marches up to the whiteboard, grabs a marker, and he spends 5 minutes walking the struggling kid through the lesson in front of the entire class. His explanation is clear, it makes sense, and at the end, the struggling kid goes, "Oh, okay, now I finally get it. Thanks." At that, Mr. Teacher's pretty sour about this turn of events, and he picks up on a small detail X, that the kid omitted from his explanation. The teacher says, "You know, kid, you didn't mention anything about detail X." And that's when the kid turns around and looks Mr. Teacher dead in the eyes and says, "Mr. Teacher, do you want to teach this class? Last time I checked, I was a student, and this is your job." That's when the class erupts in laughter, and Mr. Teacher looks like he wants to kill the kid. Meanwhile, it was legit like a movie. The bell rings and the class ended. Oh man, pulling the reverse Uno on a teacher who's trying to embarrass you has gotta be the most satisfying thing ever. And I just love how his smugness just evaporated into anger. The guy totally deserved to be called out, didn't he? And this person comments, "I'm a teacher, and I occasionally let students teach the class if I think they have a decent grasp of the material. I then raise my hand and ask questions that I think other students might have. It's a good way to engage students, and sometimes kids can explain things in a more kid-friendly way." See, now this is a good teacher showing how it's properly done. And guys, if you think that teacher was bad, listen to this next one, where OP's Karen teacher tries to get her expelled for calling her out and embarrassing her in class. This happened years ago, at what would turn out to be my last year at a Catholic school, for reasons that'll become obvious. Now, I don't have anything against people of faith, but it wasn't my thing, very early on. I was 12 years old and in 7th grade. I was becoming disenchanted with my Catholic upbringing. I had so many questions, and it might have saved my faith to have them answered reasonably. The adults, however, did not want to reason with a curious 12-year-old. They wanted to see a nice Catholic girl who didn't feel compelled to make so much distasteful noise. With that said, sex ed was still a part of any Catholic curriculum, and as it turned out, my religion teacher, Mrs. M, was also my teacher for that class. When she opened up our first class with, "Now I'm just as embarrassed to be here as you are," I didn't see it as an expression of empathy. I saw it as a grown woman who was humiliated to be teaching basic biology, and it made me sad. Also, the junior high version of our class wasn't just biology though. It was an effort to shape our view of the world. With that said, Mrs. M taught us sexual health as per Catholic doctrine, but she also peppered in some of her own weird personal viewpoints, shaped by her own history, I guess. We had this box at the front of the class where we could discreetly write down and drop off questions that we were too nervous to ask out loud. Someone asked what the female orgasm's like for women. Mrs. M did not explain. Perhaps she hadn't had one a day in her life. She said, "We don't worry about that. That's not a necessary part of reproduction. It's not necessary for procreation, and people only sleep together for the purpose of procreation." Now, that sounded very dodgy to me. I brought her statement home to my mother, who's always been very open with me about these things. I asked her if women really weren't supposed to enjoy sex all that much, and she was horrified. She then said something that would be lastingly valuable. She said to me, "Ask questions in that class. Teachers are supposed to answer your questions. If they can't, maybe they should not be teachers." So the next class, Mrs. M taught us that homosexuality was a sin. It was pure evil. And this was too much for me. I had an uncle who married a man who had been a huge fixture in my life. And I refused to believe that God would think who you love is worthy of hellfire. She then went on to say that gay marriage was both impossible and wrong. That's when I raised my hand and I asked her, "Why is it wrong?" Her answer was, "Because they can't procreate, and procreation is the purpose of marriage." She basically snapped that at me. I just sat silently. I didn't demonstrate agreement nor dissent. I went home and thought about it for a while. I needed to come back to class with a question that was going to properly F Mrs. M's crap right up. It wasn't an easy task, but I came up with something that I thought was worth trying out. So the next class rolls around, and Mrs. M taught whatever stuffy, deplorable lesson she had in the plan. And then she opened up the class to questions. So I raised my hand and she called on me. And I said, "So if a woman is infertile, but she really loves the man she's with, and she wants to share the sacrament of marriage with him, does the church approve the marriage?" It was a no-brainer for her. She said, "Of course." So I then followed up with, "But she can't have children, and marriage is for procreation. Why can she get married, but two men or two women who can't procreate can't get married?" Now, anyone who's seasoned in Christian apologetics can explain this one pretty easily, but I had hit Mrs. M somewhere deeply personal in front of 30 other children. Mrs. M was a married woman of around 50 or so, with no kids of her own, which is very unusual for a Catholic woman who doesn't believe in birth control. Mrs. M was infertile, and to her, I was questioning the sanctity of her marriage and its validity in the eyes of God. It was basically a sucker punch to her gut, and she couldn't collect herself to punch back. She instead flies into a rage. I can remember her face to this day. It was a deep, deep shade of red. She then said, "This is not a debate class. What are you trying to do here?" And with that, she sent me straight to the office. Now, for context, I did not know that Mrs. M was infertile. It's something that my mom told me post-office battle. And for the record, an apology letter was determined to be insufficient by Mrs. M. She wanted me expelled from the school. She wanted to never see my face again. My mom came to collect me, and a battle ensued. Mrs. M wanted blood by the way of expulsion, or at the very least, suspension. But my mom was having none of it, because curious kids don't get suspended for questioning what they're taught. The only thing that worked in my favor was my history of being a nerdy, non-disruptive child with good grades, so a compromise was struck. I would not get suspended, but I couldn't participate in sex ed nor religion class any longer. My grades in those classes would be determined solely by written portions. These written portions were completed at a desk, positioned outside the room, which Mrs. M smugly carried out for me every class, followed by a smug, "I hope you enjoy today's class." I didn't mind working outside the classroom because, to me, it was a good example of the ease in which an adult can collapse under a child's questioning. I decided that religion and sex ed would become my specialty classes. I would master the curriculum, and I would get the best grades I could, and Mrs. M would have to watch it happen. I worked very hard, harder than I had in other classes. I studied at length, and I did additional research online. I finished out the semester with about 95% in sex ed and 98% in religion. The final exams for both classes were entirely multiple choice. I was permitted to the classroom to be supervised for the exams, and there was no room for her biases to creep into her grading. She passed me the Scantron sheet back from my religion exam. It was 100%. I thanked her with a saccharine smile. She then fixed me with a grim expression before moving on to the next classmate. A few days later, it was a Scantron sheet for the sex ed exam, 100% again. And I said, "Thank you. Thank you for all you've taught me," as I smiled up at her. She said something under her breath, and she moved on. And the thing is, Mrs. M hated me so much. She hated that I was winning against her, and she found other ways to express it in the following semester. It does warm my heart a little to think of her having to grade all my schoolwork, one correct answer after the other. The relentlessly curious nerd girl was a pain in her side that would not go away. And worst of all, she demonstrated that she understood what you were teaching. She just didn't believe in it. All I gotta say is way to frickin' go, OP. She absolutely destroyed Mrs. M. And what a win-win situation that was, right? Like getting almost perfect grades and also getting to feel like you're on top of the world by knowing you're making a teacher so mad because she can't win against you. So this happened in the early 2000s in my junior year of high school. The district had just built the third high school in our city, and most of the teachers were new. The band director was one of those new hires. The guy was qualified for the job, but he had zero people skills, and he was extremely abrasive towards students. He had previously taught university, and he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that high school students were not college-level music majors, who live in practice rooms and write symphonies in their sleep. His normal behavior consisted of berating students for not knowing university-level curriculum, and also talking down to everyone how he can't understand why they were so incompetent. Every day, at least 2 to 3 students would leave class in tears. We did complain to the higher-ups, and they brushed us off. He also made students hate attending his music classes, and many dropped the band and orchestra as a result. One of the classes he taught was supposed to be an intro to music theory. Now, for those who don't know music, this would be a class that should typically teach things like different types of chords, the definition of music symbols, the logic behind key changes, etc. At the first class of the year, there was about 25 kids enrolled. Most of these were music and drama kids who wanted to be teachers or performers in the arts one day. On the first day, he hands us a quiz because he wanted to see how much we knew. I think there was maybe like 3 to 5 kids who were able to attempt a single question on the quiz. No one got a single answer right. That was how advanced it was. Now imagine signing up for what you think is a basic pre-algebra class and walking into advanced calculus. That's what it felt like. This teacher spent the entire class period berating us for basically being dumb and not being prepared when no one could even attempt this quiz. We told him this is an intro class, none of us have learned anything like this before, and his response was, "Really? I thought this was an advanced class." The next class, there was probably maybe 15 kids left enrolled. He did the exact same thing. He asked us to perform something we can't even understand, and then berated us for not being prepared. At every class, he would say, "I thought you were all musicians. This is supposed to be an advanced class." By the end of the second week, there was like 6 students left in this class, including myself. He softened up slightly to those who stayed, and he seemed to think that we were his prize students, and that this was his class of elites. Think Professor Slughorn from Harry Potter. In truth, we all thought he was insane and cruel, but the 6 of us had sufficient music background and experience to understand a fraction of his lessons. Without the bell curve, we all would have failed his class. So a few months go by and we were at the end of first semester. By now, every student connected to music in the school hated this guy, and repeated complaints had done nothing to fix the problem. The admins filed away every complaint. All they did was remind him that he's supposed to be more kind to students. He changes nothing, and he still berates students and make them cry. So when it comes to the final exam for his theory class, he decides that he wants to give it to us early, so that on the day the final is supposed to be scheduled, we could have a class party instead. Of the 6 of us left, 4 of us have the same period after his class together as well. The class was AP English, and we were prepping for the AP test. We had no problem with a class party in music right before the AP prep exam, so we didn't complain. So the day of our music final exam comes, and after we finish the test, he tells us that for the class party, he wants to take us all to breakfast at the new IHOP that opened 20 minutes away. His class was first period. Now, we try to tell him all the issues with this plan. We told him that we aren't allowed to leave campus without permission slips, as it was a closed campus policy due to an incident where a student left campus for lunch and got hit by a car and was killed. We also told him that we won't get back in time for second period, which is the final exam. And the biggest thing is he doesn't have permission to remove us from the campus. What if there was an emergency and we're unaccounted for because we're not even at school? Well, his solution was to tell us that after the start of the class on the final class day, that he would be going to IHOP. And if we wanted to join him, that was our choice. But if we didn't, we would have to stay in the classroom and not bring attention to the next class, that there was no class and no teacher. Without talking about it to each other, the 6 of us saw an opportunity to finally get the admin's attention to the complete disregard this teacher had for rules and policies. We made sure to inform our English teacher that we might be late to class on the day of the final, due to a class field trip for music theory. She was irritated, and she reminded us that this final was very important, and that she would not give us extra time if we came in late. We told her we understood, and then gave her details of where we'd be, what we'd be doing, and who we would be with. She said she still expected us to be in her class. So on the day of the final, we all went to IHOP. It took forever to get there because of construction, and forever to get our food because the restaurant was newly opened and had a large number of customers. We got back to the school halfway through second period class. The principal and admins were waiting for us, and security was waiting for us. My English teacher had called the front office to complain that 4 of our best students were missing and that she was fairly certain we weren't even on campus. That prompted the admins to check attendance, and they saw that we were all marked present that morning. And then they searched the entire school looking for our class. The 4 of us walked into our English final to a livid teacher. We knew she was pissed at us, but she couldn't punish us, beyond saying that we had the same remaining time as the rest of the class. None of us did as well in the final as we could have if we had the full 87 minutes, but we were doing well enough in the class that the lesser marks did not affect the overall grade too much. As for the band teacher, he had a private reprimand that was so loud the entire school could hear it. He was confused as to why the administration was so upset that he took minor children off campus without permission or notice, and also without proper school transportation or even a good reason. He stayed with his usual attitude, but this time towards the admins. He says, "Why are you guys so incompetent about this? They're old enough to drive, so what's the problem?" That's when the English teacher, who I actually adore, absolutely went mama bear on the administration, on how they could continue to employ someone who disrespects the other teachers so much as to deprive his students of their final exams, and put them in a potentially dangerous circumstance. He told us to drive ourselves to the restaurant, and any accidents or medical issues would have been the school's fault. He was fired later that day. Many of the students had a gleeful but confused reaction, since the 6 of us weren't talking to anyone about it. Everyone knew that this tyrant of a teacher was gone. We didn't spread the story very much of how it happened because we still feared being reprimanded for involvement, since the guy technically gave us a choice to go with him or stayed. But I always smiled when people gossiped about what the final straw was that got him fired. Holy moly, what a freaking wild story that was, guys. And what an incompetent teacher who clearly has the I don't care, I do what I want attitude. And I do have a question though, like what kind of school did OP attend where complaints about a teacher are completely swept under the rug? Like, don't you think that maybe if 20 kids drop a class and often left class crying, that something should have been done about it a long time ago? I'm just glad he's no longer teaching because he sounds like a nightmare to students. And I'm also glad that OP and classmates went with the guy to IHOP. I actually thought they were gonna let him go and rat him out to the principal that he was skipping out to eat pancakes. Like, the fact that they complied and went with him off school property to teach the guy a lesson that they knew would lead to serious reprimand was absolutely brilliant. I think I would have done the exact same thing if I had a nightmare teacher. Who wouldn't? Oh, and to add more to how crappy this guy already is, not only did the kids have to drive to IHOP themselves, OP came into the comments and said they also had to pay for their own pancakes. I'll just leave it at that. This happened 15 years ago, but I can't help snickering about it from time to time. In high school, I was a pretty mild-mannered kid. I came from a very strict household, and a call from the school was absolutely unacceptable. I also wanted approval from authority figures, as I rarely got it at home, so I kept quiet, did good work, and was generally well liked by my teachers. So like I said, it was a strict household, and most of my outfits were closely inspected for modesty by my very conservative parents. If it passed at home, it wasn't going to get me in trouble. I did try hard to fit in with the other kids though, and I found that wearing a layer underneath made regular outfits pass the home dress code. So I still got to wear distressed jeans, but you could see black leggings instead of my knees. That's not a huge deal, and it helped me feel better about my appearance, at least socially anyway. So as trends were set, leggings became super popular. Finally, I was ahead and on point with my style. Some girls did begin to abuse the system though. The school dress code required skirts to be no shorter than 3 inches above the knee. That means the standard was suddenly lots of tiny denim miniskirts with leggings. So the school cracked down and said that leggings were no longer allowed under skirts. Of course, since I had different home rules, I didn't even own a skirt that short. My skirts had to reach the knees, which was 3 inches longer than the school requirement. I didn't even mention the new school rule at home because I didn't think that was an issue. So one day, I decide to get super cute. I'm wearing my knee-length denim skirt and leggings, as it was still trendy and a bit chilly out. It passes home inspection and I head off to school. Nothing was said in the first 3 classes, but like I said, I was a good kid and always well covered. That's when one of the super mean teachers, not even mine, was just standing outside her door. She spots my skirt and leggings in the hall, and she grabs me and marches me down to the office. I knew of the rule change, but I truly thought it wouldn't be a big deal since I wasn't wearing a miniskirt. The teacher shoves me inside, and she yells something about a dress code violation, and then left to return to her class. I was called in, thinking the principal would laugh with me about how unreasonable she was, but boy was I wrong. He screams up and down how I was dressed inappropriately, and he would be calling my parents to come get me, to take me home to change. And I'm thinking, oh no, no. I would rather die than have the principal call my parents. So as I stood there, I turned around, showing him my clothes. I tried to argue that my skirt met dress code, and the leggings covered even more. I even tried to explain that my parents would take it out on me in an aggressive manner, but he wasn't going to hear any of it. I had to think fast, so cue the malicious compliance. While he was looking for the number to call, I just kicked off my shoes and I began wriggling the leggings down and off, right there in his office in front of him. Since my skirt was long enough, I just shoved my pants in my bag, and I stated that now there's no reason to call my parents. I was fully compliant with the dress code of the school. The guy just stares at me with his mouth agape, and I could see him turning red while trying to figure out how to deal with me. He just ends up yelling, "Get out of my office, get to class." Never have I felt so relieved. Well, I guess that's one way to get out of a call to your parents, but honestly, I'm so shocked that OP even did that, and I'm shocked that the principal didn't tell her to go to the bathroom to change, or at least give her a pass for the day, for goodness sake. But dress codes, right? And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where OP tells a story about new neighbors that moved in and stole her driveway, and they get mad when she calls the cops. It's a wild story, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.